Hi guys, this is Zach from Watches on You, and today I'm going to be comparing the new Omega Seamaster 300 meter and the Rolex Ceramic Submariner. Submariner Date, I should say. If you've been watching our channel, you may know that we have already done a comparison between the Seamaster 300 meter and the Submariner. Now that comparison, though, however, was with the aluminum bezel Submariner, and this is the ceramic. With that, the ceramic comes a lot. With the ceramic comes a lot more features, as well as a much higher price tag. So that's actually what I'm going to address first. So on the bracelet, the Seamaster 300 meter, this is always on the rubber strap, comes in at $5,200 versus the Submariner, which comes in at a price of $8,500 retail. But due to the Rolex's kind of high demand in their sports models right now, it will take you absolutely forever to be able to get one at retail. So pre-owned, this one's going for $9,550, and I've seen many into the tens as well. So obviously there's a huge price gap where the Submariner is almost double the new price of the Omega. So now let's go over whether that's justified. You can see right away these watches both have ceramic bezels. That's one thing that changed with the ceramic Submariner, obviously, but then Omega kind of made their bezel a lot more prominent in the new one, and you can see it actually is a little bit more reminiscent of even the Submariner's bezel than the previous model, where it was a little bit more subdued. You also on these watches get a 300 meter water resistance for both of these. So that's professional diver status. Really, unless you're into serious diving, you're never really going to need a depth resistance any higher than that. So that's perfect. That's about the benchmark for the luxury divers. And on the Omega, though, you do get a helium release valve. So if you ever saturation dive, that will definitely be a good feature. When the Submariner does not have a helium release valve, you will have to go to the Sea Dweller if you would need one. So now let's go on to the cases. So the Submariner is 40 millimeters, while the Omega is 42. However, I will say they do wear about the same size, and that's due to the Omega having much smaller and thinner lugs than the Rolex, where you can see the Rolexes are a bit more chunky here, and that's different from the pre-ceramic Submariners where they had much thinner lugs. So that actually, in my opinion, makes the Submariner feel more like a 42 millimeter watch, just because of kind of the width and chunkiness of the case. So on the Submariner, you get polished sides of the case and then brushing on top of all the lugs, as well as the brush bracelet. And then on the Omega, you get the classic flowing Omega polished bevel across the case, and then you get brush sides brushed on the inside of the lugs there. And you get brushing on this side as well with polishing around the crown guards. So this model does not have the bracelet, but I'll compare bracelets with the two-tone model, as I don't currently have a steel one that I can compare it to. So the bracelet on the Omega is very good quality as well. They did change it a bit with the new Seamaster 300. It's a bit flatter than the old one, where the old bracelet had a bit more rounded links. It's a very comfortable bracelet, however. You can see the number of links that it has, and that really helps make it conform to your wrist, because they're so thin, they can bend a lot very nicely. You do get a micro adjust, so I'll just set the Submariner down here for a sec. So you get a micro adjust, you just push in there and you can move it back and forth, and then you also do have a diver's extension as well when you do that, which is a great feature for a dive watch. So the clasp itself just locks down with two push buttons right here. There is no extra safety. However, I actually have a Seamaster 300 meter and I've never had a problem with it coming undone on accident, so I'm not sure if the safety would be necessarily necessary, and I honestly like push button clasps a lot just for ease of use. On the Omega, though, you do also get a clear case back where you can see the master coaxial movement on this timepiece. So before I go into movement specs, let's go over the Rolex's bracelet. So the Rolex's bracelet is a classic oyster bracelet. You can see this is a pre-owned model, so it does have some scratching on it. but the brushing is very high quality. It has polished sides and polished side of the clasp as well. The clasp is a standard press clasp. You can see that it does have a spring in here though, so it's easier to open and close. It's a standard press down and then flip the safety over. Very secure. It's really never going to come undone on accident. Now this also has a glide lock clasp. So what that means is you can move this back and forth here, which is, again, micro adjusts are just absolutely fantastic. I really like just having the functionality of being able to micro adjust a clasp throughout the day, even as the size of your wrist changes, or you could use it as a diver's extension if you're putting on a wetsuit or something. And that is one thing to note. The Submariner does not come with a diver's extension, which is interesting. Again, you'll have to move to the Sea Dweller to get a diver's extension. I think Rolex probably could have put a diver's extension on this, and I think they probably should have, just to compete with the likes of the Seamaster. Even though most people are not really going to be using a diver's extension, I think it would have been nice for Rolex to include them. So now let's go over the movement. So as I showed you the movement on the back of this watch, and you can get, before I mentioned in solid steel, you can get it in either the silver and blue, like I showed here, the silver dial, blue bezel, or you can get it with an all blue glossy dial, blue bezel, or all black, black bezel, black glossy dial, and that's the spec that this two-tone model is, obviously, except where all the gold is, that would all be steel, including the hands. So actually, going on the dial here, you can see they both are kind of maxi dials. They both have large indexes. And you can see, though, however, the Rolex has a date with a magnifier at 3 o'clock, as they classically have, while Omega moved the date on the new one to 6 o'clock, which I kind of like, which I personally like, because it keeps the symmetry of the dial. I actually prefer the no-date Submariner to the date Submariner for that very reason. But I digress. So now the movements on these timepieces. So the Omega has a master coaxial Omega in-house movement, and the master coaxial movement is really fantastic. I mean, very accurate, chronometer certified, and it has an extremely high magnetic resistance of 15,000 Gauss, which is about the same as an MRI machine. So you really won't have to worry about ever magnetizing your watch whatsoever, and that's something that the Omega has over the Rolex. You also, as I showed you, again, you obviously get that clear case back on the Omega, which again the Rolex does not have if you like to view your movement. So the Rolex's movement, that uses the 3135 movement. It's accurate to plus minus 2 seconds per day, which is fantastic. That exceeds COSC chronometer certification standards. And it's got a 48-hour power reserve, which is a good standard. That's really what I like. All watches, I think all watches should at least have 48 hours of power reserve. And the movement on this is a very good movement. It doesn't have the magnetic resistance of the Omega, but it's going to be extremely accurate, and it's going to serve you very nicely with no problem. Rolex's movements are known as really the most durable movements, and that's one thing that it might have a little bit over the Omega, because there's the coaxial escapement when it comes to oiling that makes it, you have to oil a little bit more and things. And the Rolex's service interval is actually 10 years now, which is the best in the industry, and that's higher than Omega's for sure as well. So I'd say that the robustness of the Rolex's movement is better than the Omega. However, the Omega, with its increased magnetic resistance as well as the exhibition case back, which I personally just like, I think that it actually also offers almost more features than the Rolex's movement, though. So now let's go back to kind of overall my thoughts on these two. So Rolex, it doesn't really have many more features than the Seamaster. The Seamaster actually has more features, I'd say, than the Rolex, as it has the diver's extension, the helium release valve, the magnetic resistance on the movement. It just has a bit more than the Rolex. However, the Rolex is a Rolex, and when you're getting a Rolex, you know it's going to last absolutely forever. I mean, it's iconic. This movement is tried and true on this thing. And also the other thing is it may be more expensive, but value retention wise, it's going to serve you very, very well. Rolexes have almost never gone down in value historically. Well, sports Rolexes versus the Omegas, which the steel Seamaster 300s are going at about $3,600 pre-owned. So if you buy a new Seamaster, you're going to be taking a bit more of a drop than you will the Rolex, because again, Rolex is Rolex. It's the most iconic watch brand out there. Many people just love it. Again, the name carries a lot of weight on this. So honestly, if you're buying a brand new Seamaster, you're going to probably be spending more in the long run than you will on the Submariner after resale eventually. So that is one thing to consider between these two timepieces, and I think shouldn't be overlooked. Now, however, I think that the Seamaster, though, gives you a ton of value for the price. I'd say at $5,200, it's definitely the best dive watch at that price point. I will say the Rolex's finishing is a bit nicer. I like their brushing. I like their polishing. It just seems a bit, and it also, I personally like the style of the Submariner a little bit better. So that's one thing to note, though. The Omega is giving you a ton of value for money when compared to the Rolex, and I think that if you like the Omega styling, and also one thing that would be good is if you don't want the flashiness of a Rolex, you don't want people coming up to you and seeing it, or I guess judging you for having a Rolex, I think that the Omega is a fantastic choice, and these are definitely my top two dive watches, I would say. I really like both of these two watches. So I hope I let you guys learn a little bit more about the differences between these two timepieces, and maybe know a little bit more why the prices are different. I think the Omega again offers more features, but the Rolex, you're getting rock solid resale value, which is something that would be great as well. So thank you guys for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.